check, check. Hey, 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 hey. 262, 26. Hey, hey. Check 26. Hey, hey, hey. Check 22. Hey.
Good morning. I know, but because it's in the light.
Ladies
Check,
and
check.
gentlemen, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the post-budget debate press conference. My name is Daniel Pasley, and I will be your moderator for this morning. We will have remarks by Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clark, after which we'll have a Q&A section where journalists are able to ask their questions. You may type it in the chat box, or you may identify yourself by raising your hand on the Zoom platform, and then you may ask your question. So there are two options. Ms. Shelley Ann Weeks will be asking the questions from the chat box after the minister has made his remarks. Over to you, Dr. Clark.
Thank you. I just want to say good morning to all journalists and members of the public who have joined this broadcast or this post-budget press conference. I don't have, I said what I had to say on Tuesday, and as is customary, as I did last year, and I believe I did it the year before, just to make myself available to answer any questions on my presentation that members of the media or of the public may have. Over to you, Daniel.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Clark. We may now turn over to persons in the chat. If they have any questions, please use the time now to ask your questions, because I know that you may have some deeper questions you want to ask based on Minister's very comprehensive presentation on Tuesday. All right. In the meantime, I will pose a question. Minister, you made a very good presentation, especially about the Serve Jamaica program. Could you explain to the public how it will happen in a face-to-face basis?
Thank you. So, the Serve Jamaica program, Social and Economic Recovery with Vaccines program, has a number of elements and will be implemented over the course of the year. The economic recovery components, which consist of a major infrastructure program, elements of that are already underway in terms of the South Coast Highway Improvement Project, and that will be a 12-month activity throughout all of fiscal 21-22. We expect the special infrastructure project, which is the $8 billion project involving major drainage works and works to major thoroughfares, widening of roads, etc. That will begin in the next fiscal year. I can't say precisely when, but I believe you'll hear from the Ministry of Economic Growth about that. There are some preparatory steps that have to be put in place. With respect to some of the other programs, such as the Paint the City program, $300 million, and the River Training program, again, we'll make further announcements on exactly when those will start, because there are some organization that we have to do to prepare.
You mentioned in your presentation about the CARE program, about an extension for Best Cash and Sec Cash. Could you explain the timelines for those?
Yeah. So in my closing presentation, I'll provide more details, but the payouts will be made in the months of April, May, and June. That we can be specific on. That's when the payouts will occur.
Thank you, Minister. Do we have any questions in the chat? Not as yet. All right. But I know there is another concern, or should I say another burning question about, in terms of the dedication of the funds being funded for the especially for the vaccines. Could you highlight, I know that you mentioned it in your presentation, could you highlight the various areas that the funding for the vaccination program will go towards?
So the Serve Jamaica program allocates $6 billion towards vaccines, and that is to be used for the procurement of vaccines, to actually purchase vaccines from suppliers, as well as the storage of vaccines. The vaccines have to be stored under specific circumstances, as well as the distribution of vaccines. The Ministry of Health has announced many sites across Jamaica, including health centers where vaccination can take place. That comes with attendant costs, preparing those sites and providing ancillary services to those sites. And of course, the administration. There's a computer system that has to be procured, software, storage, data management, etc. So that is to cover all of those costs, and also to make room for the possibility that prices could increase over time. So we are, again, planning for tomorrow, as I said in my presentation, and trying to cover the possibilities, and therefore providing, $6 billion, which should be more than sort of adequate to cover us over the course of the year in order to attain levels of vaccination that are consistent with herd immunity.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'll now turn over to Ms. Shelley-Ann Weeks. I get that we have a question.
Stephen from the Gleaner has indicated that he'd like to ask a question.
So, Mr. Stephen from the Gleaner, you may ask your question. Just open your mic and you may go ahead.
Testing.
Yes, we're hearing you. Just speak up a little bit more.
Okay. Good morning, all. Minister.
Morning.
Good morning. Jamaica. Just for my own clarification. Jamaica should grow between 4 to 8% in the upcoming fiscal year. How does that pace of recovery for the island compare to other Caribbean countries, and the world economy?
Okay, so the projections that you mentioned are indeed the projections of the Planning Institute of Jamaica, and I believe the Bank of Jamaica has similar projections. We believe that Jamaica's growth will be consistent with growth that we're going to be seeing around the region and around the world. I mean, different countries are different, and the crisis has affected countries in very, very different ways. Some of our sister countries in the region are much more highly dependent on tourism than we are, and would have experienced much higher declines this year. So though we are forecasting a 12% decline, the projections for some of the neighboring countries in the Caribbean space are declines of 20% this year, a GDP contraction, 24%, 25%. So it's possible, depending on how quickly tourism recovers, that those economies could register larger numerical gains just by virtue of that fact. So, the crisis affects us and has affected the region in different ways, and as a result, the recovery will be differentiated as well. If Jamaica, as I said, those projections that you mentioned are the projections from our official economic forecasting agencies in Jamaica, and we'd be well on our way to recovery if those materialize.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Shelley-Ann, we have another question.
This question is from Ms. Carlene Smith. What are our plans for the resuscitation of job growth, given the significant increase in the unemployment levels as a result of the pandemic?
Right. So the nature of this crisis is such that it's been channeled through the fact that we've had to live with restrictions on movement of people in order to slow the spread of the virus. Once people are able to move around more freely, we're going to see economic activity pick up, and that economic activity is likely to be accompanied with job growth, as we saw the job growth to the quarter ending October of 2019. The vaccination program is going to be essential to that, because as soon as our vulnerable population is substantially vaccinated, the real risk that the measures are attempted to protect us from, and that is the risk of our hospital system being overwhelmed for extended periods of time, that risk begins to subside, and the room for economic activity to expand begins to increase that room. Now, what the government is doing is that we are prioritizing within the envelope of expenditure that is possible, and we're prioritizing with increased capital expenditure by 20% and allocated a large share of it to infrastructure projects through the SERVE program. We're spending $31 billion on infrastructure at all levels. And that infrastructure spend will generate jobs and will have an impact on other sectors as well. We'll have thousands of jobs through that infrastructure spend on highways, on secondary roads, and on major thoroughfares, drains and drain infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewage infrastructure. It will be, and we've seen that before, right? When we've had big construction growth and big infrastructure spend, we've seen that tenant job growth that has come from that. But in addition, the programs, the Paint the City programs and the programs for the river training programs and the other programs announced will also provide temporary jobs for others as well. So we expect that as the economy reopens, as we're vaccinated, economic activity will pick up, and that is likely to be accompanied by job growth. But we're not waiting on that. We are catalyzing and stimulating further job growth through our infrastructure spend and through the social programs that we are going to be implementing this year.
Has there been any interest from private entities, pharmacists, private doctors to purchase COVID-19 vaccination independently? And how would that, if at all, soften the financial burden on the state for vaccine purchases?
Okay, that's more a question for the Minister of Health, I would respectfully submit. What I can say is that we have provided, the Minister of Health has, put forward, and has put it in the public domain, how much the vaccines are costing for the vaccines alone, and we have provided double that amount to allow for the possibility of the government to purchase more if they become available, or to take account for the fact that prices could increase, or that we have storage and distribution costs. So the government is well equipped and well prepared to purchase all the vaccines that become available that are necessary for our population. To the extent that others want to do so, you have to talk to, that's a question for the Minister of Health. That's a health policy question. From the Ministry of Finance, however, we have made substantial provisions, as was announced on Tuesday, and as I repeated just moments ago, for the purchase, storage, distribution, and administration of vaccines.
Okay, this question is from a social media user. Does the change from 2 to 1 guarantors for SLB pose a risk of persons being hesitant to be sole guarantor or compounding the problem?
So by going from the requirement from 2 to 1 guarantors, that doesn't mean that you can only have one guarantor. If it is useful for you as an applicant to have more than one because someone doesn't want to be a sole guarantor, then that's a decision that you can make. What we're saying is that if you can only manage to find a single guarantor, the state will not withhold the opportunity from you to borrow from the Student Loan Bureau. And this is in response to feedback that we've received over a number of years, that persons, particularly persons from lower income brackets, find it difficult to find more than one guarantor. Right? And again, as I said in my presentation, we are seeking to balance accessibility with sustainability. The Student Loans Bureau doesn't work if it can't be sustained. It doesn't work if the monies lent are not paid back. But similarly, our policy objectives are not achieved if the loans are not accessible to people. So here we're making an attempt to make it accessible by putting a less burdensome standard for guarantors, and at the same time not removing it entirely, because to do so would compromise sustainability.
Lots of questions on Facebook asking about the status of Set Cash, whether or not it will be extended. Could you expand on that a little more?
Yes, I had announced one of the things I was very pleased to announce in my budget presentation is that we are going to have Set Cash payments in April. I have to wait until the new budget, until the new year begins, which is the 1st of April. And Set Cash payments for the month to be paid in the months of April, May, and June for persons who lost their jobs due to COVID and remain unemployed. And the full eligibility and will be spelled out later, will be spelled out later, but the payments will be made in the months of April, May, and June. And, that we estimate that there'll be 50,000 Jamaicans who will benefit from those payments. And by June, we expect, or June/July, the schedule that's been published by the Ministry of Health, we expect the vulnerable population in Jamaica, those over 60, to be substantially vaccinated by then, which will make a world of a difference in terms of the measures that will become necessary at that point to stop the spread, right? Because remember, it's the vulnerable population that disproportionately leads to hospitalizations and to ICU capacity being absorbed. And so once that segment of the population is vaccinated, it offers hope that economic activity that has been restrained by measures will not only, the growth in that activity will resume.
Okay, thank you, Minister. We have another question from Stephen at the Gleaner. The BOJ paid the government of Jamaica a dividend to assist the Serve Jamaica program. At the same time, the BOJ instructed banks not to pay shareholders dividends in the year. Is this a double standard that essentially hurts small shareholders?
I could depend on you, Stephen, to ask a question like that. First of all, the BOJ has not paid a dividend yet. The dividend will be paid in the first week of April. And the dividend relates to profits that the central bank has made. And by law, it's not a discretionary activity. The BOJ Act speaks to the central bank paying over to the consolidated fund profits that it makes in a particular year. So this is a legislated requirement. So it's not directly comparable. And bear in mind that this dividend, the largest single dividend that's ever been paid to the government of Jamaica from an entity, a public entity, comes at a time that where we need it. It's $33 billion, and you just have to think what activities would not be possible without that dividend. So I hope you're not complaining there, Stephen, with your question, but the situations are not analogous. This is a legal requirement. It is the law that the central bank pays over dividends on profits that it makes.
All right, we have some question from social media. No new taxes has become a welcomed hallmark of this government budget presentations. However, what can be done to manage the increase in prices, such as gas and utilities, which affects most Jamaicans?
Right. So, we have made a lot of policy investment, in strengthening the central bank and in changing the mandate of the central bank. Before, and we're going to make that all effective on the 16th of April. Before the 16th of April, 2021, the mandate of the Bank of Jamaica has been, this and that and that and this, a whole hodgepodge of different things that makes it difficult to hold a central bank to account. Effective April 16th, the unequivocal, unambiguous mandate of the central bank is going to be price stability, which means keeping inflation low and predictable and stable. And we have empowered the central bank with the resources to be able to do so, and with the governance structure, the accountability structures, and the transparency apparatus. And what we are likely to see as a result of that is that inflation rate in Jamaica is likely to continue to be low and stable. The target rate of inflation is between 4 and 6%. So, we expect in general for price movements in that within that band over the medium term. And if you compare that with our history, you just have to look at how inflation has evolved over the past 30 years. You will quickly recognize that what we've experienced over the past 5 or 6 years of inflation between 3% and maybe 5.5% is at the extreme low end of our historical experience. And we expect that to continue with the empowerment of the Bank of Jamaica, and that in itself, the independence of the Bank of Jamaica to pursue these objectives will further reinforce inflation expectations converging with inflation target and becoming self-reinforcing in the way that it is in other societies.
All right, so I have been informed that we have one more question. We have one more question.
This question is from IG. They're coming in. This one is from IG. Will there be a stimulus for rural areas, especially because of loss of jobs and job security?
Right. So let me just say, a large number of the persons who are on our Set Cash program are from rural Jamaica. In fact, I would even dare to say a majority of persons who receive Set Cash grants and who are beneficiaries of Best Cash grants, a big majority of the 50,000 are in rural Jamaica. Our infrastructure spending program of $31 billion is largely in rural Jamaica. $17.7 billion from Harbour View to Port Antonio, and also extending the highway into Williams Field. The special infrastructure project will include rural areas. Our river training program is all going to be spent in rural areas to train rivers and reduce the risk of flooding and natural disaster in areas that have been historically prone to that. Our Paint the City $300 million program will have elements in Kingston, but there will be several rural towns that will also be included, and the Minister of Local Government and Rural Development will speak to that later. So absolutely, we, in the programs that we have, and by the way, normally river training programs are like $30 million a year. We have increased that 7 times, just to show you, to $200 million, just to show you the emphasis that we are placing to ensure that rural Jamaica is included in our social and economic recovery programs. And as I sort of outlined, and I am repeating, the vast majority, certainly of the Set Cash and Best Cash benefits, which are programmed at about $3 billion over the months of April, May, and June, will accrue to persons who are in rural Jamaica.
Okay, this one is from social media. At a time when we have the worst economic recession in history, the government has announced no new taxes. Will there be a rollback on this, as has happened before? Should harder time face us? Well,
I don't think we've ever had a 4-year period of no new taxes. And in that 4-year period, there has been no rollback once those announcements have been made. So, we're transparent with our policy. I have leveled with the Jamaican people and explained the circumstances that we're in, how difficult those circumstances are. But I've also spoken to uncertainties and risks and the fact that, so we face this crisis, which has, as I mentioned in my presentation yesterday, it's been like a punch to the gut, but we responded and we remain standing. And my announcement of no new taxes in that context has, as you have pointed out, sort of resonated with the Jamaican people, but it is born of a belief and conviction that because we are targeting a quick recovery, and a quick recovery is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential. and an increase in taxes at this time would inhibit such a recovery and be inimical to such a recovery. And that is the underlying thesis and thinking behind the policy of no new taxes this year.
Okay, we have a question from the Twitter. This one seems to be quite a hot topic. Will the government revisit the $50 customs limit anytime in the future?
Yeah, so, I was duty-bound to respond to the question. I know many people on Twitter have been talking about it for months. And as I had promised I promised I would look into it. And I did look into it. I got all the data, and I got all the numbers. And I provided an explanation to the Jamaican people why we couldn't, at this stage, move that threshold. But in the future, certainly, it is something that we can look at. When conditions change, when the environment improves, as our foreign exchange earnings begin to be restored, right? Remember that we have lost $2.5 billion of foreign exchange earnings this year. And our foreign exchange earnings from tourism are at a 30-year low, right? So as soon as those conditions change, we can absolutely reassess that threshold.
All right, well, this is a question that I am personally asking. When the announcement was made yesterday about the $10,000 grant for senior citizens who get vaccinated, there were a lot of comments about it. It sounded like a bribe, some people say. Could you expand a little bit more on that or explain the thinking behind that?
Sure. So, public policy can be a very important instrument in achieving results that are in the public's interest. Now, it is established around the world that it is in the public's interest that our population is vaccinated, and more importantly, that our vulnerable population is vaccinated. Because, as I explained before, when our vulnerable population is vaccinated, we can have more certainty that restrictive measures are unlikely to be required, because it's the vulnerable population who, if affected with the coronavirus or with COVID-19, end up in hospital, in ICU, in numbers that can overwhelm the health capacity. So it's established that there is a public interest. The country has an interest in the vulnerable population being vaccinated. Now, we are aligning that objective in a public policy initiative that says, look, if you are over 60 and you are in an income group where you earn less than $1.5 million, formally, and you have been vaccinated, then you're eligible to receive this grant. And it is a conditional cash grant. It's not unique or new. Our PATH program is a conditional cash grant program, right? It's conditioned on children being in school. It's conditioned on other requirements. If those conditions are not met, you are not eligible for the PATH grant. And conditional cash transfers, as I mentioned in my opening response to your question, are recognized policy tools designed to achieve outcomes that are consistent with the public's interest. And that's what we're doing here. We are providing something that is conditioned on action being taken by the citizen that's consistent with the public's interest.
All right, we have two more questions. I think this will be our final two questions. Thank you for participating so gently, Minister, so far. All right, so the first question is, will there be any government-led divestments or IPOs within this fiscal year?
Very good question. Very good question. We had announced earlier that we are working on at least two at the moment, the Jamaica Mortgage Bank and the Jamaica Public Service Company. The government owns 100% of the mortgage bank, and it owns approximately 20% of JPS. And those divestments have been in train for some time, and I expect that we'll have at least at least one of them during the fiscal year, maybe two. Let's see. We'll provide a more detailed update at a later time.
All right, looking forward to that. And the other question is, can you provide more details on the proposed new SME funds at DBJ and the total amount of equity that you think can be catalyzed by this initiative, as well as the modality of the proposed loans?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's something that I'm very excited about. We are providing a loan of $5 billion to the Development Bank of Jamaica. $2 billion of that 5 is to be used to seed 2 equity funds with $1 billion each, on condition that the fund manager raises additional equity from private and institutional investors. So the government would be investing alongside other investors. And that's important because that provides a greater chance that the government's money will be used properly. So that $2 billion we expect to catalyze a further at least $6 billion in companion investment from institutions, because we'd be saying to the fund managers, look, we will start you off with the $1 billion, but you have to go out and raise an additional 3 as a minimum. And so from that initiative, we are hoping to have $8 billion of equity funds. And remember, equity is permanent capital that you don't, that the MSME does not pay back. You are able to, the investor is able to recoup its investment by selling those shares, in the same way that we're going to be selling the shares from the Jamaica Mortgage Bank and selling the shares, the 20% of shares that we own in JPS. So that's where that $2 billion is going to go. $8 billion of equity capital for the MSME sector. Today, as it stands, equity permanent capital available for MSMEs doesn't really exists in any substantial degree. So to the extent that we're able to execute on it, it will be a massive change in the MSME space. We're also providing a loan of $1 billion to DBJ for the DBJ to on lend to MSMEs who are interested in making the digital transition in their business. As you know, having e-commerce capability and having the modality where you as a business can interact with your customers through the internet, where they can browse your products, they can interact online with your products, they can choose, they can purchase, and by purchasing, they can end up receiving that product or that service. Sometimes digitally, if the product is an intangible, like a license or a book or a brochure or a set of instructions or a ticket, or receive it physically through a delivery mechanism if it's a physical product. This $1 billion will supplement an existing program at the DBJ where MSMEs can qualify for a $200,000 grant in order to purchase this e-commerce platform from any one of the 25 Jamaican IT service providers who have been approved under this government program to supply the MSME market. What the additional $1 billion will do, it will allow this DBJ program to scale up from $200,000, a $200,000 grant to a $200,000 grant and up to an $800,000 2% loan. And so what we're saying is there was $200,000 before, we're multiplying that by 5 and saying, look, we're putting $1 million up for any MSME that meets the qualifying criteria that wants to transition to the digital space to do so. Because again, there's a public interest in bringing greater levels of efficiency and productivity to our MSME space, because that in itself will lead to greater economic activity and an expansion of economic activity, growth jobs, and so on. So that's again the third element, or the second element of that $5 billion that I'm very excited about. The third element is $1 billion for loans to MSMEs. And again, the DBJ, I said one, it's $2 billion of loans through the DBJ, and they will announce the details on how those loans can be accessed.
Thank you so much, Minister. And in the interest of time, we'll be wrapping up this press conference. I want to say thank you to persons on social media for your thought-provoking questions, and also the members of the media. Also, special thanks to the Financial Secretary, Ms. Darlene Morrison, for attending, and also Mr. Trevor Anderson, Principal Director from the Fiscal Policy Management Branch here at the Ministry. I also must thank our hardworking JS production team and other persons behind the scenes. On behalf of the Ministry of Finance, I thank all persons for tuning in, and do enjoy the rest of your day.